Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Prophecy Update. As always, it's our desire to bring the events that are happening in the world from a biblical perspective and also a prophetic perspective. So thanks for joining us this week. What we're going to talk about on this broadcast is the concept of the AI virtual Tamagotchi kid and the forbiddance to marry that was predicted in the scripture. So as you know, the Bible predicts that the world and the false church are one day going to forbid people to marry during the age of apostasy. And we know in context this happens in the age of apostasy, so it didn't happen earlier in church history. 1 Timothy 4:3 is in the context of apostasy. However, this particular passage in 1 Timothy 4:3 does not explain why the world and the false church will forbid marriage. However, like John Walvoord once said, the generation that lives closest to the prophecies coming true will understand them the best. And so here we are in the last days, getting closer and closer to a lot of these prophecies coming to fruition, and we now possibly could understand the why. The why do they forbid people to marry? And so maybe the lies of the man-made anthropocentric global warming and the demonic, basically, worldview of radical environmentalism or radical climate change or whatever you want to call it, could possibly answer the why. And combining this with technology that is exploding into our world like we've never seen before, the possibility of AI doing all kinds of things in our bodies and producing virtual realities and the metaverse, all these things are coming together to possibly answer the why. Why do they forbid marriage? So this lends itself to the narrative of the globalists who say we have too much population on the planet. We've got to reduce the population. Mother Earth just simply can't sustain herself anymore with so many people on it. And so many people are consuming its resources. We've got to reduce the population. It's possible that we could see the globalists, the governments of the world, following this satanic narrative of global warming and sustainable development, sustainable resources. And every time they use sustainable, it's always referring to we got to reduce the consumption of people and yada, yada, yada. So where this is going in population reduction could be to forbid people to marry, and which implies the forbidding of people to have kids. And that's possibly what the why is in this passage of why Paul told Timothy that in the age of apostasy, they're going to forbid people to marry. Because it could imply that they don't want them having kids. And they could call it, and some of them are already calling it, sustainable reproductive rights. And that's where that word sustainable comes from, sustainable. It's always a Marxist term, sustainable. And in their warped way of thinking, their satanic way of thinking, the globalists and everyone that believes in what these globalists are saying believe that only certain people should have the right to have children. Again, what people have the right to have children? The people who think like them. It definitely wouldn't be Christians, that's for sure, or anyone that would oppose their globalist worldview and their wokeism and everything else that they tout from their Babylonian mindset. And so right now, the mindset is already here. Therefore, it is very possible that the globalists might recommend to people that do not fit their criteria for having children, that they could be forced into a route of having a virtual AI baby to save the planet. Again, this is all a possibility. It's just me putting things together and connecting some dots. And again, I'm not 100% sure. But I'm trying to figure out as we get closer to the end times, I want to see how this passage gets fulfilled. And I want to know the why. I know it's going to be fulfilled, but I want to know the why behind it. And that's what we want to know. How is this gaining force to eventually the church, the apostate church, says that we shouldn't be married? Now, how do we get there? Well, that's what we want to explore a little bit. And again, these are possibilities, these are theories, and I'm not, fully 100% sure, but watching the trend lines, they sure head in this kind of direction. Anyway, as far as technology is concerned, this is not out of the reach to have a virtual AI baby. So let's take a look at that. Let's look at the technology and see the things that they're saying and possibly get some type of trend line going, okay? So let's look at the prediction in Scripture. It says this in 1 Timothy 4, 1 through 3. Now the Spirit expressly says that in the latter times. Now again, the latter times of the church, the last days of the church, the last days of this age. Are we in the last days of this church, of the age? Yes, we are. Jesus gave us the sign in the Olivet Discourse. He said this to the disciples, that when you see nation rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, that is a rabbinic term for world war. Then basically the last days have started. Now, we don't know when the last days will end. We just know they have started, and they started in World War I, because that's what that rabbinic phrase means. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. That is a phrase meaning world war. Okay, so we know we're in the last days. We're in the latter times. And then it goes, some will depart from the faith. That's the apostasy, the great apostasy that's discussed here. Obviously, Paul talked about that to the Thessalonians in chapter 2. And so we're in the great apostasy. We would all say that we're in the great apostasy. People are departing, defecting from the faith like there's no tomorrow, like we've never seen before. And then what happens is they give heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons. And so they're bringing in all these false teachings into the church to cause more apostasy. They speak lies and hypocrisy. So they do the very same thing they claim others shouldn't do. And so they're hypocrites. And having their own conscience seared with a hot iron, okay? So we're talking about, this is church leadership, that they're teaching these things, false doctrines and stuff like that, and their conscience is seared. And then he goes in verse 3, and this is the key thing we want to look at, forbidding to marry. And what he is saying there is that the church will forbid to marry, okay, in the apostasy. So we haven't went there yet in the churches, but it's gonna come, okay? And if you continue to read 1 Timothy 4, chapter 4, he will go on and say they're gonna forbid eating meat. Now, here's the thing. We're already seeing that groundswell happen in the world. And in the world, they're wanting us not to eat meat, right? And so eventually the church, according to 1 Timothy 4, is going to forbid eating of meat. And then, and right here, what we're studying, they're going to forbid to marry. Now, typically what happens is something happens in the world, and the world starts pushing a narrative, right? And then the apostate church, the false church, will then follow the trend line of where the world's going. So the world is right here, and it's always moving in this direction, and the false church is always following it right behind. So my conclusion will be, this forbidding to marry and like not eating meat will happen already as an edict in the world, okay? And then what will happen is the apostate church will then push the agenda of the world system, because right now we're starting to see that even though the church is not married to the state, many of the churches that are apostate are following exactly what the state is pushing, what the governments are pushing. We just saw that in the lockdowns, right? They pushed what the state wanted them to push, and pushing narratives. And now we have churches pushing creation care. We have churches pushing LGBT stuff, trans stuff, all this stuff. But that's what happens with the apostate church. It follows right along with the world system, okay? While the remnant stays where it's at and holding on to Scripture, and it just moves further and further away from the church. So the idea is the world and the governments are going to start forbidding to marry, and then the churches, they'll run this narrative through the churches, and the churches will then start pushing people not to marry. Now, again, here's the thing. Why? Why would the churches, why would the world forbid people to marry? Because the churches should know better, but the apostate church doesn't care. The churches know that the Bible teaches that the two shall become one, that the foundation for society is marriage between a man and a woman raising children. That's the bedrock of society. They know that, but they're going to forbid this. Okay? Well, what trend line are we watching right now? Well, let's look at the mindset. And you have to understand who you're talking to in the order, okay? So you have the general public, then you have true believers, and then you have those who know what narrative they're pushing. Even though they don't believe in the narrative, they push a narrative. And then you have in the middle the believers who carry out the narrative, and then you have the general public that if they lack information will just go with the narrative as well. And what is the narrative right now, okay, that the globalists are pushing? The globalists want control over us. That's what they want. They want to control everything. They want to have access to all the money. And that's basically it. They want to be little gods of this world. And so they're willing to take away our rights, our privacy, individuality, our comfort, whatever. And they're doing it under the lie of man-made global warming. Okay, so that's the narrative. Now, the guys on the top don't believe it, but they're using that to push the narrative. And so the people in the middle, the real believers of global warming, they're all in the middle, and what we call them is useful idiots. And then under them is the general public. And the useful idiots push the narrative on the general public. And that's where a lot of people are getting swept into this because they don't know the truth in all of this. Well, anyway, it is the lie that man is contributing to global warming. That's not science. It's basically a pseudo-crisis, get me right, a pseudo-crisis created to get control from people. That's what this is. And of course, in this lie, and this is how you can tell it's satanic, that man is the cancer, right? Humanity is the problem, and humanity needs to be eliminated. That's very satanic. And the reason why is because it attacks God's command to be fruitful and multiply. It attacks God's view of humanity, that all human beings in the womb or outside the womb or those who are handicapped, mentally handicapped, or senior adults, all have value because they're made in the image of God, okay? And the way the globalists look at humanity is not the way God looks at humanity. The globalists look at humanity as something, as a cancer, something to get rid of, something as an annoyance. And so they make up a false narrative that we're overpopulated. Folks, we're not overpopulated. In fact, the stats on this is you could fit everybody in the world today in the state of Texas. There's plenty of room and there's plenty of natural resources. What happens is they hurt our ability to get a hold of natural resources, or they hurt the production of food. So for instance, the killing of fossil fuels right now is hurting all of humanity, okay? And it's gonna hit third world countries particularly hard. And that's why we see rising gas prices. So it's their mess up, intentional mess up and deconstruction of harnessing the natural resources to provide energy for the planet. It is also based on their willful desire to create scarcity in food. Here in California, we were the breadbasket of the world. Everything is produced here in California, vegetables, fruits. Israel is a close second, but California is the main breadbasket. Now here's the thing. We could make endless amounts of food. California could be a country unto itself. But here's what they do. They cut the water off to the farmers. They make such high regulations it becomes nearly impossible to farm. And so with that being said, they actually create a shortage of food by eliminating water to the farmers. And California will not build dams and aqueducts and all kinds of things to catch the snowpack from the Sierras. So what they do in California is intentionally not create a system to catch all the water. And if they did, we would have plenty of water. It wouldn't be a problem. But again, for control, you have to control food. So you have to make food scarce, and then you have to make energy scarce. So this is all what the plan is, okay? It's not an accident. It's not because man's using too many resources. It's that the globalists and those who follow them are making life difficult on purpose. They're actually generating scarcity. They're generating the problem with energy. They're doing that on purpose. And that goes against the dominion mandate of Genesis chapter 2. See, the idea of being fruitful to multiply, but God said to Adam and Eve, have dominion. Dominion means, and that's a command, is that human beings are to tap into the natural resources of the world and use it to benefit humanity, to make life easier, to make it helpful for people to live. But what did the satanic globalists do? They make it harder to live by not harnessing the natural resources. So that's kind of where we're at. So anyway, they make up this false narrative that we have too many human beings on the planet. We're overpopulated and they're consuming all the resources, which is a joke. It's just a lie. And that Mother Earth, we're hurting Mother Earth and she just can't sustain all these people. And according to them, this is why we have global warming, famines, water shortages. No, it's not. That's not science. That's actually a cult religion when they say that. The reason we have periods of cold and warming has to do with the sun primarily and other factors that are outside anything that human beings can do, whether it's weather patterns, solar flares, whatever. There's so many things we don't have control of. But here's the thing, as a believer, all you have to do is go back to Genesis 8:22. God told Noah and he promised that seed time and harvest, cold and hot, all the seasons will continue to go as he controls it. So God is in control of warming and cooling. And so man has no impact on this. Carbon emissions coming from man actually makes the earth greener. So the fact that carbon emissions might be up has nothing to do with man. It has to do with the sun. And because of it, the latest stats on this is that the earth is becoming more greener and lusher because of carbon, but that carbon is not coming from man. For goodness sakes, one volcano can outdo any carbon emissions that man could ever try to reduce. So carbon is not a poison. Carbon is actually beneficial to the plants and trees and to our environment. So anyway, we know it's a lie. Their science is pseudoscience. It doesn't back it up, and that's the problem. But anyway, the problem is the mindset. Is the mindset there? Of course it is. And like I said, the ones at the top don't believe it. They just push a narrative. But the ones in the middle believe it, and they're the ones who disseminate that information out among the general public who doesn't research anything. That's the problem with the general public. They're ignorant of the science and the facts. And so all they do is listen to the middle row, the science, the leftist scientists, the leftist philosophers, the leftist whatever, media, they listen to them, and then they just believe that narrative. So, for instance, examples of this mindset. Remember the famous oceanographer Jacques Cousteau? And he said this is a terrible thing to say, he said. In order to stabilize world population, we must eliminate 350,000 people per day. It's a horrible thing to say, but it's just as bad as not to say it. It's like, dude, you're like totally evil to say something like that. Or how about Prince Charles, this guy who's pretty evil, who said population growth must be halted if the world is to live within nature's benevolence and bounty. It's just crazy. It's this, again, useful idiot, doesn't know the science behind all of this. Or how about Eric Pianka? He's at the University of Texas. He's a professor there, and he told students in his audience that people are, quote, no better than bacteria, and their number on Earth should be reduced by 90%. He even suggested that AIDS is too slow to accomplish the needed reduction of humans, and said that Ebola is far more efficient and a speedy killer. And when he ended his talk, guess what he said? He said that we should sterilize all now living on the earth. How do you like that? How evil is that? And of course, the students in his audience, who also have a Romans 1 mindset, applauded when he said that everyone needs to be sterilized. So you get it, right? The mindset's there. And so the solution for all these globalists is depopulation, right? And like John F. McManus points out, in the 1990s, the Club of Rome actually published a book entitled The First Global Revolution, whose conclusion states, the real enemy then is humanity itself. This goes right along, guys, with the satanic idea that even Margaret Sanger, who began her desire to reduce certain populations, blacks and Hispanics, right, by promoting birth control and abortion. Or how about a guy by the name of Paul Ehrlich, who wrote The Population Bomb in the 70s? Or the guy by the name of James Lovelock, who wrote the Gaia hypothesis. Or how about someone like Al Gore, who said at the United Nations COP24 back in 2018 that we need to surrender more money and power to the UN and government so they can regulate CO2 and make the climate stop changing so everyone could live in peace and security. Isn't that wonderful? Peace and security. He's using actually a phrase that comes out of 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. He doesn't even realize it. And so anyway, that's Al Gore, right? That's the mentality that we need to give global governments more power to stop this CO2, this danger. Al Gore, you have to understand, is out of his mind saying things like this. But he goes on, he suggests that the solution was simple. More restrictions on liberty and energy, more globalism, more extreme population control measures, and lower standards of living for people everywhere. That's his solution. He's insane. Or how about the guy Bill Gates that you all know and love, right? Just joking. He's been involved in sterilization of people in India and Africa. And he can never really go back to India because they'll arrest him. But again, does he have the same mindset? Of course. Is he pushing the mindset? Of course. Watch this video clip and watch how he explains the formula to reduce carbon emissions.
I asked the top scientists on this several times, do we really have to get down to near zero? Can't we just, cut it in half or a quarter? And the answer is that until we get near to zero, the temperature will continue to rise. And so that's a big challenge. It's very different than saying, we're a 12-foot high truck trying to get under a 10-foot bridge and we can just sort of squeeze under. This is something that has to get to zero. Now, we put out a lot of carbon dioxide every year, over 26 billion tons. For each American, it's about 20 tons. For people in poor countries, it's less than 1 ton. It's an average about 5 tons for everyone on the planet. And somehow we have to make changes that will bring that down to zero. It's been constantly going up. It's only various economic changes that have even flattened it at all. So we have to go from rapidly rising to falling and falling all the way to zero. This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
So as you see in the video, the first issue to reduce carbon emissions is P. The P in his formula is people, persons. And like you said, if we do a really great job on new experimental jabs, healthcare, and reproductive services, we could lower that by 10 to 15%. Hey, Bill, what do you mean by new experimental jabs? What do you mean by reproductive health services? Well, first of all, is there something in the experiments that are going to kill people? Is reproductive health services is just another name for abortions, right? So he says we can probably reduce through health care, and it's not health care, it's health kill, 10 to 15% of the human population. You see the mindset, and he doesn't blink an eye about it, right? He just says it like there's nonchalantly. So now the idea that there are simply just too many people being born, and most of them in the developing world where population growths are increasing, and they are hurting the planet, so to speak, with their carbon emissions, so we have to do something. And so now, there's been so much propaganda from these types of individuals. Many of our young people, our millennials, our Gen Z, are asking the question if they should even bring kids into the world. I mean, that's unbelievable how they're thinking. And because they have been convinced that it is actually virtuous not to have kids for the sake of saving the planet. How insane is that? So for instance, there's this one guy that wrote on The Guardian. The Guardian's not a trusted newspaper, but again, sometimes I have to read these things to see what they're saying. So you got this leftist by the name of Travis Reeder, and he's someone who believes in this global warming hoax, anthropocentric global warming. And he wrote in The Guardian, why we should have fewer children to save the planet. That was the title of his article, right? And he goes on to say, the Earth's ability to absorb greenhouse gases without violently disturbing the climate is finite. And each additional person contributes to the total amount. So we ought to consider adopting a small family ethic, right? Reducing the population, having less kids. And even pursuing fertility reduction efforts in response to the threat for climate change. I mean, this is hook, line, and sinker. This guy buys into the lie, totally out of touch with reality. And he's writing that. How about the other groups that have formed because of this false narrative? How about the birth strike group? Have you heard of these people? These people are declaring their decision not to have kids because of the severity of ecological crises. Unbelievable. They say they don't want to have kids because of the extra carbon emissions that their kids and their descendants will produce, which is crazy. And they cite that the World Bank says that the average person emits 5 tons of carbon dioxide a year. They think this is bad. This is how bad their minds have been brainwashed. This is a Romans 1 mind, that the carbon that comes out of someone's mouth is hurting the planet. Are you insane? Yes, they're insane. Or how about this young person, Cody Harrison? He's a 29-year-old who recently joined the group of the birth strike, and he said this, you are gambling with someone else's life. He said, if things don't go well, that human is not going to have a very good life, and that's why he and the rest of them are not going to have kids. Or how about this other young adult, Lori Day? She's another member of this birth strike group. She said this, when climate change gets worse, it multiplies other things. It's like dominoes that are following. And then she goes on to say, it goes beyond sea level rise and storms. It affects food, production, migration, resources, and war. So carbon emissions creates war. Carbon emissions affects food production, right? What are you talking about? Where did you get this? Again, where did they get it? Talking points from the global elites who know this is not happening, but give a false narrative to the general population through the believers. And so you've got people here who are totally deceived. And how about, here's the middle strata, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. She told 3 million Instagram followers, there's a scientific consensus that the lives of children are going to be very difficult. And then she asked the question, is it still okay to have children? You see where it goes? Now, she represents the middle ground, the believers who are pushing this on to her 3 million followers of the general public. The Guardian, which is not a conservative news organization, but again, sometimes you have to read these liberal news outlets to understand what the enemy is saying. So anyway, they reported that a woman by the name of Gwen McElhen, she's 26, and she decided to get sterilized to save the planet. Yeah, crazy. She comes from my state, crazy California, and she went around for like 5 years to find a doctor who would sterilize her. But I guess she found one, and he sterilized her so she could make her sacrifice to save the planet. Wow. Or how about this person? Casey King. Grew up in San Diego. Was a daughter of 2 loving parents, and she wanted to be a teacher since she was 5 years old. And of course, as a teenager, she had planned to have children on her own. But the false narrative got to her and created a crazy mindset in her. And now she says, but with more health crises and climate catastrophes, I started to worry more about the state of the world in just 10 years, let alone in 100 years when the children of my grandchildren would be having kids. And she goes on to say, that makes me feel like it would be wrong to bring someone into that chaos without their consent. Wow. Wow. Okay? You see how the narrative messed up her mind? Anyway, after graduating college at University of California, Berkeley, of course she went to Berkeley, of course. She's now working full-time as an animal rights activist. You could have guessed that, right? And she has decided never to give birth. Oh no, save the planet. And this article about her goes on to say that King is emblematic of a growing number of young people who are worried about having children in a world marked by climate and ecological crises and threatened by overpopulation. Yeah, unbelievable, right? What else? Well, again, like I said before, it's not just going to be forbidding to marry. They're already wanting to reduce our meat intake to save the planet, right? Because apparently eating meat is bad for the planet, supposedly, right? It's crazy. And they want to replace the eating of meat with, like, they say, well, go eat bugs or even eat human flesh. I mean, that's how ridiculous they are. I'm not going to go into that because I'm focusing on the marriage aspect, but yeah, this is beyond Romans 1. These people have a depraved mind to think like that we're going to stop eating meat and start eating bugs or even human flesh. Really? That's satanic. But again, this is part of the agenda, and you have to understand the false narrative, save Mother Earth, save the planet. And we're going to reduce the population and eliminate the consumption drastically by reducing the human population. So another gal by the name of Megan Kalman, she's a co-founder of Conceivable Future, there's another one of these believers, said, if everyone consumes the way the U.S. did, we would need another 4 to 6 Earths. What? Where does she get that at? It's not actually about the number of people. It's about how those people consume. And so this is the idea of reducing first world countries, their ability to eat what they want to eat and bring everyone down to a starvation level and having very few items to eat. It's like a dystopia, right? They want to bring it all down. They say it's not fair that we're consuming all these things. It's not fair that you Americans or you Australians or you Canadians or you South Africans or New Zealanders or Europeans get to eat all this food while everyone else in the world starves to death. So we're going to reduce your food intake so we can redistribute that. So basically the idea is to make everyone starving to death. And do we have a trajectory on that? Yeah, according to the book of Revelation, chapter 6, we know where that goes. A quart of wheat for a day's wages and 3 quarts barley for a day's wages. That's where it's going. Food will get so scarce that in the tribulation period, it'll take 1 day one day of work to get one piece of bread. So that's what they're going. They're actually creating scarcity because of this false narrative, right? Like I said. But anyway, you can see the mindset is here. And so the argument coming from the globalists, the UN, the World Economic Forum, is that population growth and economic consumption and food consumption are the two main causes of man-made global warming. And according to the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they concluded that, okay? And you can read the report here on this link. It's very lengthy, but that's what they concluded. So in essence, they have made, in spiritual terms, a sacrifice to Mother Earth, to Gaia. And really all this is about is rank pagan spiritualism. That's all this is. It's not true, it's a lie, and they've got many people to believe in it. So, where do you think it's going to go? So if you have the mindset already in people's heads, then the next step is to implement the strategies and the agenda to stop population, to reduce the population, to depopulate, okay? So they're already doing it through abortion, they're already doing it through assisted suicides, and they're gonna get more of that, or they're already doing it through soft euthanasia and different things like that, right? And, but now, they might go into a level, and I've read this, and they say, we will not ever coerce anyone to do this, okay? But you know that's a lie. They will. They want to get into, and maybe the term they come up with is sustainable reproductive rights. Yeah, sustainable, that's that catchphrase, reproductive rights. Basically this, that only according to them, who they deem the ability to do this, only certain people will have the right to have children, okay? They will deem who can marry and who can have children. That's where it possibly could go. And again, I'm theorizing, I could be wrong, but I'm just watching the trend lines, and I'm watching the mindset in which these people, as I demonstrated to you, what they believe. They're sterilizing themselves, guys. They're refusing to get married. They're refusing to have kids. Okay, so we're just one step closer to the UN or the World Economic Forum or whoever telling everybody, hey, you know what? We got to cut back here. We're going to save the planet. We're going to have to sacrifice, and only certain people can have children. That's where it's going. Certain people can be married. So just recently, a lot of news organizations, good news organizations, picked up about this concept of Tamagotchi children, which will be common in the next 50 years, says a particular expert, okay? They had a title in their article called The Great Reset, Fake AI Tamagotchi Children Will Be Common Within 50 Years, experts say. Okay, in the article, it states, prompted by fears of, what's the word? Overpopulation problems. One leading expert on AI believes that the coming generations will begin raising fake IA Tamagotchi children instead of real offspring. Now, if you don't know what Tamagotchi means, Tamagotchi is a term that was used for fake AI pocket-sized digital pets, okay? They were popular with children, and the children would look after them and play with them, but that's kind of the phrase they're using in this, okay? Well, anyway, however, according to one leading researcher in the UK, another Tamagotchi generation is just over the horizon. But instead of raising mass-produced, pocket-sized digital pets, the new generation will seemingly live a more Blade Runner-esque, right? You remember Blade Runner? Where you had AI and they couldn't tell the difference between the AI and the real. Remember that? They're going to be seemingly live a more Blade Runner-esque existence with would-be parents raising digital children instead of real human beings. Yes, you heard that right. That's insane. But it goes with the mindset, okay? The article continues on and says, fake children would be the product of artificial intelligence, AI. and would reside within so-called metaverse realms. Metaverse, that sounds familiar. Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg is developing the metaverse. And of course, that's what they're working on, right? So you would have an AI child, a Tamagotchi child, in the metaverse that you would raise. So you wouldn't really raise a human being, you would raise a AI baby, and that AI baby would grow to be a child and whatnot and into an adult apparently in the metaverse. Again, putting more people out of reality, obviously. So according to the article, the researcher Catriona Campbell expects such fake AI children will become extremely popular within the next 50 years, as popular sentiment gives way to Malthusian views, with individuals opting to distract themselves with fake alternatives to children instead of actually raising offspring themselves. And I think here's the thing, it won't take 50 years. We're in the last days. You're going to see an acceleration of this. This is going to be a thing that's in the near future, not 50 years from now. It's going to happen quick because the young people already have the mindset already. Anyway, Campbell goes on to state in this article, virtual children may seem like a giant leap from where we are now, but within 50 years of technology, and I think it's way less than that, we will have advanced to such an extent that babies will exist in the metaverse and they are indistinct. Did you catch that? Indistinct from those in the real world. Yikes. That's scary. That the virtual baby will be indistinct from a baby living in the real world. Something's up here. That's wicked. Anyway, the article continues on. As the metaverse evolves, I can see virtual children become an accepted and fully embraced part of our society. What? In much of the developed world, she continues, we're already well on our way to creating Tamagotchi generation, which for all intents and purposes will be real to their parents. Well, I'm sorry, they won't be real, lady, because they're virtual. And in order to be a real human, the Lord has to put the spirit of life in you, and it has to have a soul and a spirit. All that has to go into making a human, and only God can make humans. So sorry, they're not human. Sorry, they're not real. They're fake. And people who think they're real are delusional. They're out of reality. But again, this is part of the crazy Romans 1 narrative, right? Anyway, she goes on to say in this article, make no mistake that this development, should it indeed take place, and it will take place, I believe, is a technological game changer. Yeah, it is in bad ways, which, if managed correctly, could help us solve some of today's most pressing issues. And what would that be? Well, she says, including overpopulation. Thank you. She has just possibly told you the why they will forbid marriage. And hence, so going back to Scripture, this may well be the why when Paul told Timothy that in the future, in the age of apostasy, in the last days, the churches will forbid marriage, because marriage in general implies having children. But instead, they will propagandize people through the church not to have kids in order to save the planet, and then offer them as an alternative, saying, well, why don't you have a Tamagotchi AI virtual baby in the metaverse? And people will buy into that. If they buy into some of the lies they do now about global warming, then they're going to buy into Tamagotchi children. So again, like I said, 1 Timothy 4 in the context saying this is what the church will promote, which implies that's what the world will promote. So it'll start in the world first, and then the apostate church will push the issue. We'll go right down the same wicked path. And again, in violation of being fruitful and multiply, in violation of how society is functions and is based on the family unit, right? This is a disaster for the family unit. There will be no family unit, right? This is a disaster, and so it will destroy society. But don't forget, It's the churches that will be pushing this. Just like today, when you see the churches pushing the values, the false narratives of the globalist system, of the woke system, of the Babylonian system, they will also push this issue to save the planet. And so they're gonna say, well, we can't eat meat. We're gonna save the planet. We're gonna not marry and not have kids. We'll have virtual kids, and we're gonna sacrifice ourselves to be good stewards of the planet as God would want us to do. They'll say, and so we're gonna make this sacrifice, and this is going to be in line with couching it in Christian terms of love. This is going to be for loving our neighbor, not to get married, because we don't want our neighbor to be hurt by a terrible global warming disaster. This is in the name of tolerance and fairness to other people. This is in the name of creation care and being good stewards of our planet. That's how they're going to couch it, right? That's how they're going to couch it. And none of those things apply because what they're doing is a lie. None of those things. You can't love your neighbor if you're practicing a lie. That's not loving your neighbor. So it doesn't even apply. It's the issue of biblical fairness doesn't even apply. The issue of tolerance doesn't apply. The issue of love doesn't apply when it's done in the name of a lie. But it doesn't matter because the church will be in the middle of who's pushing this. Remember I told you there's three tiers here. There's the one who creates the lie and they don't even believe it. And then there's the middle tier and they are the real believers and they disseminate that information out. And then there's the general populace. So what they're doing is using the church at the middle section to push the agenda on the general population. So look, if you have the media, the schools, education, the politicians, governments, and then you have the churches, then you have all the information outlets taken over, pushing a false narrative. And that's where it's going, right? That's what's happening. So folks, I can't be 100% sure, but I'm just connecting dots and watching the trend lines because I know for sure what Scripture says. Scripture says that one day the church will forbid people getting married. It says that the church will forbid people eating meat. Now, I'm just looking at the trend lines, so are you. And we're watching the trend lines. So if I see the mindset, and if I see the means, that they have the means to implement this, because most of the church has been hijacked by the Babylonians. So they have the means to do it, right? And they have the motive to do it. Well, then what's stopping them from actually doing this? Nothing. And so, I mean, like I said, I could be wrong, and there could be something else that they use for having people not marry. But we may be onto something. Again, I fall back. The generation that lives closest to the period of time in which these prophecies will be fulfilled understand them the best in the sense that they see how the why, and they see the building, they see the setting up of things. And that's a very privileged position to be in, okay, to see the why, right? And so because of that, because you and I can connect dots and see the why in some of this, like for instance, like the mark of the beast, you already understand the how and the why, right? They have the technology, they're going to implement it, and the why is they want total control, so you already understand how we could go to a one world government and a one individual controlling the world through a mark of the mark. You see that, you know that. But that's what I'm saying about this issue. So it's a privileged position to see. Think about for thousands of years, Christians could not identify that. Even in the Old Testament, they could not identify the why. But you and I can. But here's the deal. It brings more responsibility. Because we know these things and we can connect dots better than any generation in the world, then we're obligated to get it out there and tell people and say, this is heading in a direction, be careful, this is where it goes, and warn people and tell them that things are wrapping up, they better accept Christ soon, and so they can miss all this that's going to happen in the tribulation and go home with the Lord in the rapture. So we got some business to do. So we can't just throw our hands up and just wait for the rapture. We got to be about our Father's business, right? So anyway, with that said, then a couple of announcements. We have our new website up, okay? So on our website, we have a church tracker. And what I would ask you to do is, if you are part of a healthy, well-balanced church, and again, there's qualifications to this, right? Your church cannot be Calvinistic. It cannot be Reformed. It cannot be covenantal. It has to believe in the nation of Israel and the Abrahamic covenant and see a distinction between the church and Israel, right? It has to be dispensational, okay? It has to be premillennial, okay? And so for that, make sure if you want to put your church on our tracker that you meet those certain qualifications, okay? So we're trying to let people know on our church tracker where good churches are, that are teaching the Bible, that are solid, that are not woke, okay? So we're trying to make this available so that people can just go on that church tracker, look at any part of the country or any part of the world and say, is there a good church in my area? And again, we want to help people out in that. So you can help us out from where you're at and tell us if there's a good church like that, okay? Furthermore, get on our text alert system. That is the key thing in the days ahead. We have to have communication with you, because if we get cut off somehow or we get dropped from these platforms or whatnot, we want the ability to tell you what's going on. If we have technical issues or something's not happening, we want the ability to tell you so that you're just not in the dark and not knowing what's going on. So make sure you're part of our text alert system, okay? And lastly, make sure you have your Rumble, you have your BitChute, and even your YouTube platforms, okay? Some of the things that I say on YouTube is edited, and so you'll have the full version on Rumble and BitChute. So just make note of that. Anyway, with that being said, please pray for us because we're under enemy attack constantly. And if the Lord puts it on your heart to help us financially, we could definitely use your help. We need help in our general fund. We need help in building our new building. We've hadn't had a building in 11 years now, and we're finally building a building, but it's in the millions. It takes a lot of money to build in California. So we're building that. We could use help from that, or we could use help in this ministry here with the online audience. Our online audience is very massive, and we are devoting staff and time and equipment to this to give you the best teaching possible with the best looking, 4K digital, so that it's not blurry, doesn't look like, hey, it's some dude in his basement, making videos on his iPhone. That we give you professional looking videos that you can share with others that can edify them, because a lot of them are not getting edified by the churches they attend or the pastors that they listen to. So we want to make a very professional looking video platform so that you can be confident to share that content, because presentation is a lot, the content is everything. And so if someone gets discouraged about the presentation, they won't listen to the content. And so that's why we're using the correct lighting, we're using a correct studio and microphones and all that stuff, but it's expensive. It takes a lot to do all of this. So anyway, if you want to donate to that, that would be great. Remember what the Lord said, when you see all these things begin to happen, like them forbidding to marry eventually, look up, lift up your heads, for your redemption draws near. God bless you. We'll see you next time.